Hi, we're just going to do a real short review of the Monroe Doctrine here. You might remember from President Monroe's presidency, the era of good feelings, one-party politics, the Federalists have essentially died off. No, there's still people who believe in the Federalist ideas and principles. However, the Federalist Party itself has died off, and you're not going to see a big rift until really Jackson. And then the rift and you get back into the party politics with the era of good feelings and all that. John Quincy Adams, son of the famous president John Adams and future president himself, is believed to have actually written the Monroe Doctrine. In fact, there's actually, Britain actually encouraged us to issue this, and we'll talk more about that later. But what are the main tenets of the Monroe Doctrine? Well, it's a foreign policy piece. It's America's first major foreign policy piece that we declared to the world and put out to the world that this is our position on foreign policy and this is what we're going to do. And the first tenet here is spheres of influence. And we claim that the Western Hemisphere, the Americas, is the United States sphere of influence, that it's our area to influence, it's our responsibility to look after it. And Europe has other spheres of influence, where a lot of their colonies are, except for the Americas. And so that we have a lot of say in what goes on here because we're the big dog over here, essentially. And that in our sphere of influence, we're going to be promoting democracy. That it's our job to promote democracy and to help democracy flourish. And that we will advocate for that. And now, most of the Americas are colonized. Europe has colonies. France and Britain, Spain and Portugal have colonies throughout the Americas. And we basically state that, the European powers that have colonies can keep the current colonies that they have, but no new colonies. And if you lose a colony because they fight for their independence, you can't get it back. So no new colonies. You can keep the ones you have. You lose a colony, you've lost it forever. So you can't go back and conquest areas. Surprisingly to a lot of people, Britain actually is very much in favor of this. Now, and they actually use their naval warships to help enforce this. America had a relatively weak navy at the time and couldn't enforce it much on its own, but with British help we could. And so what happens here is Britain basically wants this policy because they look at it as we might lose some of our colonies to Spain or some of these other European powers. Likewise, they're also worried about America expanding and taking over some of these areas in the vacuum from some of the chaos. There's some revolutions and potential revolutions going on. And they're worried about America expanding. And if America pledges to be for democracy and pledges to no new colonies and all of that, that it might limit America's growth in this region too. So Britain sees it a way of preserving some of the advantages it has. And its initial Latin American response is great. Most people in Latin America are very much in favor of it. They see it as America doing a good thing, protecting them from being taken over, or in the future if they have a revolution and become independent, if they're not independent yet. And so the reception's positive in Britain, the reception's positive in Latin America, a little bit more controversial in other places in Europe though. And it gets expanded on over the years. The most famous example is the Roosevelt Corollary. Now, this is Theodore Roosevelt. This is nearly 100 years later, almost. And basically, Theodore Roosevelt says, in order to prevent you from being taken over, colonized, and to promote your democracy and to keep your democracy strong and to keep you from being taken over by European powers or influenced too much by European powers, the United States government has the right to basically inspect the books, inspect the spending, the debts, and various processes of these Latin American countries to preserve their democracy, to preserve their independence, to preserve them from being taken over, preserve their autonomy and independence. And during this era, Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft, you're going to see a lot of Latin American countries start to no longer look so happily upon the United States, to start to see us is pushing ourselves on them and pushing our influence and pushing our businesses. You look at William Howard Taft and the dollar diplomacy, where we're forcing our business interests and businesses into a lot of these countries. A lot of these countries start to regret American influence in the era, and it continues. Woodrow Wilson. He invades Mexico 4 times with an army. He invades half a dozen other Latin American countries for a variety of reasons. Even President FDR, with his good neighbor policy during World War II, issues a list of names of German and Italian immigrants to this country believed to have fascist connections, and says, hand them over. We want them detained during the course of the war so they don't try to induce any pro-fascist or beliefs in your country or do anything that might sabotage our war effort. But that's basically a simple, basic, brief rundown of the Monroe Doctrine. A very large, dominating foreign policy piece for many, many years in American history.